So our new speaker is Mr. Kush Mishra, CTO, Senra Tech Private Limited.
Okay. So a lot of dullness in the crowd already. Last session of the day. I'll try to keep it short and precise and to the point. Had very lovely sessions from the fellow panelists. I'd like to start with who Senra is. So we're basically a network operator for LoRaWAN. We are right now present in 37 cities across India, and we proud ourselves on the LoRaWAN RF expertise. I'll quickly skip over a few slides explaining the market size. India's total market is expected to reach around 15 billion by 2020. The interesting point is that more than half of this IoT market is suitable for LPWANs. I'll give you a brief idea of what LPWAN means against competing technologies. LoRaWAN in particular has two basic unique features. One is the long range, and one is the low battery life of the end devices. What this means is for certain utilities, for example, gas metering, water metering, and so on, it's especially more useful to go with this particular RF technology. If you compare this to other local area networks like Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi, or even cellular networks, there's a trade-off. The trade-off is that the other technologies can support higher data rates, but if you consider verticals like utilities, that's not so much of a requirement, right? Most often the bandwidth requirements are much lower than what you expect from a live HD streaming utility. The cost is much lower, and as I mentioned, monitoring use cases, metering, temperature, environmental parameter detections, asset tracking, weather, and locationing. These kind of verticals are very well suited to LoRaWAN. So there's a prediction that by 2023, LoRaWAN will capture 40% of the global LPWAN market share. This is just a comparison of different kind of LPWAN technologies. So LoRaWAN is one of the low power wide area networks. There is also Sigfox, Ingenu, NB-IoT is coming up pretty soon. So there's basic differences in each of these technologies, but the primary difference would be the global specifications. LoRaWAN has already released 4 levels of specifications, and most of the other technologies are either maturing or are yet to capture a significant market. LoRaWAN has, the specs are issued by a LoRa Alliance, which is a global alliance of big conglomerates, including Google, Alibaba's, IBM's of the world, Cisco's, and so on. We are also a contributor level member of the alliance, which means we sit in every technical committee meeting to set out the standards globally for LoRaWAN specs. LoRaWAN operates in the unlicensed spectrum, which is 865 to 867 megahertz, and is governed by an open source specifications on the protocol. So the protocols can be simply downloaded from GitHub and used by developers and companies, corporates. So coming to the gas market, it's expected to reach 3.1 billion by 2027. I'll skip over why LoRaWAN competes with other RF technologies. That's something I covered in the past 4 slides. I'll tell you why it's more relevant as compared to the cheapest known smart gas metering technology out there, which is Walkby systems. One big chunk of smart gas meterings is occupied by Walkby systems, just because 2 main factors probably. The low cost, which comes because of the fact that the labor is super cheap in India. It doesn't cost much to send out a person to collect data from the field, right? With LoRaWAN, the unique selling point in this case would be that it's a star of star topology. So basically, which means all the devices directly connect to the cloud. There's no human intervention. There's nobody out there to see the meter readings or walk by the streets to collect data, which also means that the data can be sent at a much higher time interval, which means you can send data every day or every hour for that matter, depending on what kind of battery requirement you have from the devices. But as against Walkby systems, you don't have to schedule it once a month or twice a month. I've captured a bit of pros and cons of Walkby versus wireless. Walkby is super cheap in India because of the low cost of manpower. LoRaWAN might compete at good volumes, but it will not compete at lower volumes. So yeah, it's lower to middle cost. The data is collected once a month or maybe at max twice a month. The data here in LoRaWAN is collected near real time. There's of course no human intervention. The data is directly sent to the cloud from the devices. It's a long-range transmission which has two-way benefits. One is the devices, even in remote areas, connect very easily to the LoRaWAN network. The other one is that even with Walkby, you'll get 99% of metering will happen in a single pass. You might have to cover the remaining 1% in a second pass, which will not be a case if there's long-range transmission with LoRaWAN, because the link budgets are higher. So even deep indoor conditions can be satisfied with LoRaWAN. The cost of infrastructure of deploying a LoRaWAN network is much lower, which means for me as a network operator, I can go out and really cover the 100% of devices in a specific area with the least amount of investments, which makes it lucrative for me as well as gas companies. The data is automatically transferred to the cloud. It's completely wireless, which means even for Walkby, there's modes of piggybacking on a GSM network or plugging it into a HES system when the reader goes back to the command and control center. This solution with LoRaWAN would be completely wireless. And of course, you can do advanced insights. Once you gather so much data, there's endless possibilities with the data itself. So so as I mentioned, we started with a few pilots in India with gas metering. This is one of our devices which connects to an Itron ACDG 1.6 module, one of the popular ones here in India. So we wanted to fulfill the requirements from the gas authorities. We wanted to fulfill the statutory requirements of firmware updates and what kind of transmission intervals are required by the gas authorities. And this really fulfills that with a very long battery life of around like 10 years on a single life of battery, which fulfills most of the tenders most of the times. As I mentioned, the automated smart reading, it avoids labor-intensive manual metering and inaccuracies induced by the manual reading. It removes the manual billing intervention, which means the cloud is directly enabled by the readings in runtime, which also means that the consumers can actually use their mobile phone applications to measure their consumptions in real time. It ensures greater satisfaction because there is no meter reading intrusion in order to cover the remaining 1% of meter readings, which couldn't happen in the first go. There's no manually knocking on the doors and trying to get the meter readings. It prevents the revenue loss from theft or movement or bypassing the meters. There is inbuilt mechanisms of how to detect leakages and so on in the pipes. And yeah, I just covered the last point. The future of smart gas metering as we see
Kush,
it is...
you have 2 minutes.
Sure. The future of smart gas metering as we see it is, for sure it will be expanding exponentially, right? In both the commercial and domestic spaces. Right now there's a lot of planning which is kind of retrograde planning, which means after you have collected readings for the last 10 years, 1 month period, you can predict that probably during Diwali or Holi seasons, the consumption is going to be higher, or at particular times of the day, the consumption is going to be higher. But what if you had those readings, in fact? What if you had every hour of readings and you were able to predict based on real values and not just fabricated analytics that what the readings actually are and what they really look like in festive seasons, what they really look like in hourly patterns and so on. We have been talking about smart grids in energy sector for a while. We can even talk about smart centralized systems which could regulate gas distributions, right? So these are things we need to think about, and absolutely without any kind of data, these things are not possible, right? Even you'll not be able to imagine such use case materializing anytime in the future if you do not have the data or hourly consumptions and so on. So this is something I wanted to emphasize. There are things like process improvements, demand forecasting, as I just mentioned, alerts and alarms if somebody is trying to tamper with these meters. Right now, one of the previous sessions showed how to tamper with these gas meters. There is options that you can enable in these smart devices that can really tell you if somebody is trying to actually take out the device from the enclosure or trying to fiddle with the actual rotating, the meter readings. So yeah, it also evolves from simple billing collection tool to an advanced analytic engine that could also predict. So our CEO was here yesterday, and he was representing the LoRa Alliance. He mentioned an interesting use case, which I would like to share here. If you know, for example, how often a person is using gas in his home, you could club and sell this data to food delivery companies so that they know now when is the most often which houses in the area are really switching on their stoves and which are not. And you can deploy manpower based on that data. You can plan your restaurants, billing cycles, you can charge a premium. Those kind of things are not possible if you don't collect that data. So this is something I wanted to emphasize. I'd like to stop here, and I'll welcome anyone who has any questions in the Q&A session later.